Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you Read 4 of Where I Belong by Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon. We are gonna close out this book today. We have been able to go through the content that they've given us. There's a little bit of self understanding and reflection, and there's also the part of grounding and kind of using therapeutic tools to better put yourself in spaces where you can then create change, or if it's not change, at least get yourself into a position where you can kind of hear and see the things that you need to feel during the time that you need it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I know when I was going through therapy, the grounding, the feeling parts of therapy weren't really parts that I liked as much, but I think it's something that you tend to connect with more often.
Yes, I feel like because of my anxiety and because of my depression, a lot of the tools that were given to me were grounding exercises, and they have helped me feel safe and have helped me feel comfortable in my own skin.
And I think for me, especially being someone who does suffer from ADHD and having a harder time when I don't feel like things are moving forward, I think I find more difficulty in those exercises because the whole idea is to try to slow down.
Yes.
But for me, it's about, okay, like, what are we solving? What's the next solution? Where are we going next? So I was working with a therapist for a while who would do grounding exercises at the beginning of all of our sessions. And I committed to it. I tried to do my best to be in that moment. And there were times that it did help because I was distracted coming into the session or not, but it still always felt like something that didn't make me feel comfortable. Like it
Mm,
didn't give me a sense of my therapist understanding who I was by having me do these exercises.
I see.
It felt repetitive and it felt extraterrestrial. The word that comes to mind is like woo woo. Like it felt very woo woo.
Well, for you, I feel like you don't gravitate to the woo-woo as opposed to me, I gravitate to the woo-woo and the spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm not holding crystals or putting sage around my body or things like that. I think I like to see some of that stuff for fun. Like I think it's enjoyable to kind of play around in that realm, but I don't like to overutilize my time with those things.
That's fair.
I'm pretty sure everyone has a different stance on this. I mean, there's no way we all feel the same way, and who knows what the split is, whether it's 50-50, 70-30. I do think there are exercises that help people at different times in their lives. So just because I don't like to do like box breathing all the time doesn't mean I would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
There was one exercise that my therapist gave me about like imagining filling a cup with my stress and my anger, and like I never could do that exercise because it just didn't seem like the thing that helped me out. It didn't reduce my stress, it just gave me another task to try to focus on.
Gotcha.
But I don't know, that was just more of like an individual run-in with that therapist where I mean, honestly, I should have talked to him more about how I didn't feel like it was helping me out too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's okay that what he prescribed wasn't maybe what I believed in. So, like, now it's just about that journey of finding a therapist maybe that fits me a little bit better,
For sure.
which I will soon do, I'm sure. But in terms of what we're looking at today, we'll dive in deeper with what Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon have to say after our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Lisa Asano. Lisa Asano is a creative, an artist, and a ceramicist known for her fun pieces that she uses around her home. What I appreciate about her work and her style is that she's very uplifting and very bubbly, and it makes looking at her feed very heartwarming. You can learn more about Lisa Asano on YouTube at Lisa underscore Asano, that's ASANO, and on Instagram at Lisa underscore Asano.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, fourth read of Where I Belong by Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon. In this read, we read pages 231 through 299, which were chapters 10, Reclaiming Our Community, through chapter 11, celebrating our stories and then adding on the final thoughts. Up to this point, what have we learned from this book?
We've learned about compassion for ourselves and for others. We've talked about strength through migration stories and intersectionality in terms of what we face on a day to day basis.
And we kind of start off the read with a part of what makes my intersectionality, which is being an Asian man, especially an Asian man within American culture. And that's something we see kind of being delved into by our authors. They talk about the stigmas that Asian men do have to go through in this country. There's the stereotypical representation of Asian men through mainstream media, through Western films. There's an emasculation of Asian men, showing them as either passive, unattractive, and nerdy, or some variation of a martial arts expert. But there's also the component of then growing up within those stereotypes and having difficulty coming out of it, because what we know from a lot of Asian cultures is that Asian men are expected to be strong, silent. They're expected to be the providers of households without needing needs in certain ways.
Hmm.
So, what our authors talk about is that there are difficulties within Asian men approaching mental health issues that are affected by the cultural stigma, the toxic masculinity, the patriarchal societies, the lack of resources, and just the general avoidance of shame that they might bring to themselves or to their family.
Hmm.
This very much fits what I've seen from both a personal basis and something I've seen commonly represented within Asian men. It's a factor in, I don't know, even when I was in the dating scene and I was going through different apps and things like that, Asian men are the least liked people through these dating apps.
Hmm.
And that's just because of the stereotypes that are already existent out there. Hearing a lot of people actually in my life that say that they don't date Asian men, and these are different people like Asian women, white women, there was seemingly a general consensus of putting down the Asian man. And the hard part was knowing whether that was just because I was looking at it from the lens that I was. Like, it almost felt like a personal attack of who I was as my identity,
Mm-hmm.
or if it was something that was actually present. And I think it's probably a little bit of the two.
Hmm.
But did you see a different perspective on the general treatment of Asian men within America or within the environments that you've noticed?
I don't think I had a different experience other than being on the other side of the lens. And although Asian men were constantly shown under the light of either nerdy or martial artists, I guess I always viewed people as being people, and it didn't matter if they were nerdy, they were still great.
Well, I guess outside of what you thought, kind of the general vibes around you, like what people were saying, did you notice any of the stuff that the authors had talked about with how they saw the perspective of Asian men?
For sure. I think I saw it more in media because I grew up on Guam and I was surrounded by Asian men, and because of that, I don't think I had the same lens in terms of the US American perspective. But yes, I definitely saw it in media.
Yeah. Asian men, though, only make up a part of our Asian societies. I mean, this is where we can kind of talk about our communities, and maybe one way that we can have Asian men or kind of the diaspora of Asian people start to feel togetherness is by creating our communities. And that was another part that they talk about within this read.
Mm-hmm. They talked about building community and that communities can be built through either celebration, trauma, or some mix of both.
Yeah, and within that, they even talk about the difficulties with building community, especially in America, because we have this difference in cultures that exist here. There is the Eastern culture, which is very much revolving around family practices within the giving of oneself to their community, with the selflessness of who the individuals are so that the community can grow. And then we have the Western practices, which puts a greater emphasis on individual achievements and independence. They focus on competition and self reliance, and they tend to influence resource scarcity which then creates and drives more competition amongst themselves
Mm-hmm.
rather than the community of people being and working together.
Right.
So, within what you said, I think the trauma part comes from a lot of different sources. I think just what our families and ancestors have had to go through to get into this country could be the trauma component, on top of many other things. But let's also focus on the celebration. A community is built with happiness and love and all of those things.
A community can definitely be built upon positive affirmations. And one way that we did that is by making Asian Book Club.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to do that by assessing a need, and that need was to focus and highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We developed a vision of members enjoying these reads and being able to get in depth with the material. We also promoted the community by social media as well as word of mouth, and we encouraged participation through the act of a book club.
Yeah, and even beyond our Asian book club community, we have our much larger communities that we're involved of. Like for me, I really like to look at the people around me who have the same background. So people who are Korean. I think within my weightlifting group, I have two friends who are Korean, and I think that alone just creates such a strong bond of who we are. I find that if we need to talk about something that I don't want other people to hear while we're weightlifting, I'll speak in Korean, and it's always a nice resource to be able to have. But on the other side, you also have like your Filipinx community and the people and the cultural experiences that go along with that.
Definitely. I'm currently collaborating with a group of movers and writers, and one person is a fellow Filipino Filipinax. And something that they said really resonated with me, and it was that whenever they see someone who is also a Filipino, they just want to be around that person all the time. And I'm like, yes, I'm the same way. And it makes it so that there is this kinship and this way of feeling like we belong to each other as well as being able to share in this community.
Hmm. So, within the scope of things that we covered, it's merely a small portion still of everything that they go into. I think this opens topics, it opens the availability for space in which you can think about your current situation or help you connect with someone else. This book, I think, does the job of helping us further realize a little bit of who we are as Asians and Asian American people. In that realm, who would you find recommending this book to, or who do you think would benefit the most from this book?
I would definitely recommend this book to any Asian or Asian American living in the US right now. It's definitely pertinent, it's definitely needed, and it would help by giving resources to those who might not have the grounding exercises, the therapists, or the mental health care that they need right now. But it helps to give a framework and gives a sort of support for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there are a lot of people right now who would benefit from this. The grounding exercises alone give you some resource for you to feel like you have more control of maybe the bad parts that you might be feeling. Like we mentioned in the start of this podcast, it may not work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other end of that, I do think that the people that this book might really help are people that have developed or carried trauma from a younger age, stuff that they had maybe growing up, and kind of want to just start to look into that and start figuring that part about themselves, which a lot of us tend to brush off somewhere within ourselves and kind of lose track of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, with that said, that was Where I Belong: Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity by Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon. Overall, I think it was a great book.
It was.
I'm glad we read it. I think timing wise, we've had a lot of educational books now. Like we've had finance and now we've had some self learning. And I think because of that, I'm kind of ready to go into something where I don't need to learn, I just want to read.
Mm-hmm.
That may be something that comes to us by reading our next book.
Yes.
But before we tell you what the title is, let's give you some insight on what that book might be by going through our hints of jam.
Hint number one. This book is a sci fi novel. Hint number two, the novel is about society that lives under the sea. And hint number three, it's a translated modern Chinese literature from Taiwan.
Yep. And with all that said, the book that we're going to be reading is The Membranes by Chi Ta Wei, which is going to be translated by Ari Larissa Heinrich. Now, to find out more about the book, we're going to look at the summarization on the back.
The back of the book reads, in the late 21st century, humanity has migrated to domes at the bottom of the sea to escape devastating climate change. Momo is the most celebrated dermal care technician in all of Tea City, but after meeting her estranged mother, she begins to explore her true identity, a journey that leads to questioning the bounds of gender, memory, self, and reality. First published in Taiwan in 1995, The Membranes is a classic of queer speculative fiction in Chinese.
Yeah, and a little bit about the author. Chi Ta Wei is a renowned writer and scholar from Taiwan. His scholarly work focuses on the LGBT studies, disability studies, and Sinophone literary history. Ari Larissa Heinrich, who's the translator of the book, is a professor of Chinese literature and media at the Australian National University. So, for us to read together, I'm going to have Jamae tell us what we're reading for our first read.
Our first read will be pages 1 through 60, and that'll be chapters 1 through 5 for everybody.
Yep, and we're going to separate this book into 3 reads. So, this will be our first of 3 reads. I'm excited to kind of explore this space. It's interesting to see a book that was written in 1995 and delve into queer spaces
Mm-hmm,
because that wasn't really, I guess, acceptable to the general community,
for sure.
especially what I can imagine in China and maybe Taiwan based off of the history that I do know about that.
Right. And on top of that, I think what's interesting is that it's already thinking about climate change in such a deep way, even before climate change was such a mainstream thought.
Yeah. So if you're excited to read this book with us, if your mind is also still reeling from where I belong, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and you can share those with us by sending something to our email, which is
AsianBookClubPod@gmail.com, or you can message us on Instagram at AsianBookClubPod.
we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, where we have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat. Bye.